So, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
I'm always ready for rapid fire, baby. Let's do this.
Got a couple extras that have come through the chat so far already that I'll throw in here as they come up. Fill in the blank on this first one, though. It's blank that On 3 has dropped Notre Dame commit CJ Carr from number 10 to number 14 quarterback in the 2024 class.
Comedy, pure comedy that he continues to fall down these rankings. That you're telling me that there's 13 better quarterbacks in this class than CJ Carr. That's a joke. That is a hilarious joke. And at the end of the day, it means absolutely nothing. But he will prove this idiot, whoever put this list together, completely wrong. That's what's going to happen.
It's like from a Notre Dame perspective, what difference does it make right now?
Right.
I get it. Like you've got reason as a Notre Dame fan to be ticked off that your guy is dropped in this ranking for whatever reason, even though he went to the Elite 11 and performed like everyone who went to the Elite 11, not everyone, but the general consensus is he was a top 5 quarterback at the Elite 11. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to tell me he's the number 14 quarterback in the country.
Hilarious.
But to your point, what difference does it make at this point? He's been a firm commitment. He's been locked in
recruiter
the whole time. He is coming here. He's, one of the highest regarded, rated quarterbacks that, we've seen coming in the door as a true freshman in a long time. He's going to be here. He's going to play. So what difference does it make? What some yuckity yuck thinks about CJ Carr? He's your guy. He's going to be here. And I think we've all got a lot of confidence that once he gets here, he's going to perform at a top level. But, Chris, I would not put him top 10 going into next year because we haven't seen him yet.
Neither would I.
Like to see him first. CBS Sports says Irish running back Audric Estime is primed for a breakout year this season. Do you buy or sell that?
Oh, I absolutely buy that because last year he was like the closer, right? To use a baseball term. He was the closer, and he would come in when defenses were, in the second half and just punish them for being alive. And he's going to do that all game now. And I think that he is absolutely primed for a breakout year. I don't know that he's going to have like the stat line that says, all time, whatever. But his impact on the game for Notre Dame is going to be breakout year. He's going to be the unquestioned number 1 back as long as he stays healthy the entire time. He's going to run guys over. He's going to run away from guys. He's going to make guys look stupid. It's going to be fun to watch. I fully anticipate him being in the draft at the next April. Fully anticipate that being the case.
This was a little bit of a not trick question, but I wanted to see like if you were thinking the same as me. You are not. Like I understand your rationale. Like I consider Audric Estime broken out though. Like 920 yards last year in his first season as a running back. I consider him broken out already. So that's kind of, again, I wanted to see sort of how if you and I interpreted this the same. You obviously look at it and I get your point. Like he was more the closer, the bulldozer, the battering ram at the end of games and all that kind of stuff. And, business was a booming, I guess. He did pretty well in that role as he ended up with 920 yards. But I think when you run for over 900, I think he's already broken out. Now, maybe if you're talking about like, is he going to become, more like a household national name, that kind of thing? Okay, maybe to that extent he hasn't broken out. But
sure,
I think he's broken already, and now he's just looking to continue it. And like you, I think he's going to be a guy who's in the draft, getting ready for training camp a year from now.
You set me up, and I missed the alley-oop.
Hey, that's all right. Again, we all have different interpretations.
I see where you're coming from, though. I mean, when you rush for almost 1,000 yards, have you broken out already? Like,
right.
I get that. Right. I guess I would look at it, and you brought it up.
I honestly phrased the question the way it was so that I didn't lead you in that direction. I wanted to see
that's good.
What we would each think of this.
I think he will become more of a household name moving forward. He's a household name with Notre Dame fans. I don't think he's a household name with non-Notre Dame fans. And I think that this is going to be a year. They have some marquee games on the schedule where that could potentially be the case. You know,
like, is he a guy that like game day and big noon kickoff are talking about the week after, like going into Ohio State and coming out of Ohio
him
State.
being like a key to the game,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yep.
Does he become that kind of guy? That I could see that as a different kind of breakout.
Right.
Yeah, Chris says going back to CJ Carr might end up being the day one starter, him or Minchie, but love Angeli. And I mean, he could be day one starter.
He could be.
24 for the offseason.
24 quarterback situation is about as wide open as it gets, in my personal opinion. And you got to add whatever quarterback they get in the transfer portal too. Like, that's who knows who's going to be the starter. I have no idea. Nobody does.
On the subject of Audric Estime, Chi-Town asks, would we rather see Estime rush for 1,500 yards or Hartman throw for 4,000?
That's easy. It's Hartman throw for 4,000 because that means he also threw a boatload of touchdowns, and which means Notre Dame scored a boatload of points, which means they won a boatload of games. So it's Hartman for me, hands down.
Yeah, because I still think for Estime to get I think if Estime gets 50, and again, this is not taking anything away from Audric Estime, but I think if he gets that big a number, it's probably because at least one, if not two other running backs are limited or hobbled to some extent, and he has to carry the bulk of the load a little bit more. That's just kind of how I look at that. And I agree. Like, if Hartman's throwing for 4,000, they're lighting up the scoreboard. They're playing video.
It's gonna be like a pinball machine. You know what I mean? It's gonna be a lot of fun to watch.
Yep. And then Leopard Iron says, any updates on when they're going to announce the new apparel deal? From what we've heard, sometime before the end of this month. So there's no firm date on it, but we've just heard supposed to be, before the end of this month. So
it is
anytime. My sources say it could happen as soon as tomorrow.
Really?
No. Now, see, that's again. I was just playing with you there. But
John,
to me, when I hear somebody say it could happen as soon as tomorrow, I could also win the lottery as soon as tomorrow.
Right, means nothing.
That's right. Anything could happen as soon as tomorrow, but when will it actually? So I didn't mean to play with you.
Oh, see, you started something. So
yes.
No, here. So I gotta say, and this has nothing to do with Leopard's question or anything like that, but I will say that this particular topic about the apparel deal has grown so old for me. I don't give a crap who they choose at this point because it doesn't affect me in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I don't care. It does not matter to me.
And you know what? No matter what gets picked, just look at the chat right now. Please no Under Armour, please no Nike or Jumpman. It's like, it's not going to be universal. It's just like tuning in the TV and seeing the announcers. It's like not everyone's going to be unanimous on whatever they pick. The most whoever they end up with, it's going to be sort of the fine print in the details in this agreement that I'm going to be most curious about. Things like, and we might not even find out, like to what extent NIL might be involved in this, or will there be flexibility for, will it be mostly an apparel deal, but will there be flexibility in terms of what shoes the players are allowed to wear, different brands and that kind of thing.
This is the most overrated comment, and it's nothing against you, Chris, but I've heard this multiple times. Kids don't choose schools for who their apparel dealer is. That's not a thing, man. Like, I'm sorry. That's not.
Literally, have you read any of the recruiting stories, that we have on the site? Have you ever seen, like Under Armour or not, none of that doesn't come up when they ask recruits.
Nobody's like, I picked Notre Dame because of Under Armour. I picked Alabama because of Nike. Like, that's not a thing. It's just not. I'm sorry. It's not a thing. So Crystal's talking about polls and people wanting Nike. That has nothing to do with recruiting. Zero.
Right.
So, and then there's nothing you can do to convince me otherwise. unless a bunch of 5-star recruits start telling people, well, I picked this school because of their apparel deal, which isn't happening. They're not picking one school over the other because of who provides their free shorts.
And that's what I was getting ready to say. No matter what the brand is, the players get everything for free. They don't have to pay for any of it.
Right. So, they don't care.
They really don't care that much.
And I do understand the shoe situation. I get that. I get that. But people aren't turning down playing for the women's basketball program at Notre Dame because they're an Under Armour school. And unless you've heard otherwise, Sean, you're a lot closer to the women's program than I am. But if Niele Ivey is offering scholarships to the top players in the country, they're not like, you got Under Armour, I'm going elsewhere.
Right.
I don't think that's happened. I realize there's an issue with the shoes, and I'm not debating that, but they're not picking where they go to school because of it.
To my knowledge, that has not happened. Like, if you watched any games last year, you might have noticed there were a couple of players who were wearing shoes that weren't Under Armour by the end of the season.
Look at you.
I won't say who.
Well,
all you got to do is go back and look at a couple games at the end of the season. It was out there and it was pretty obvious, especially from where I sat. But when I asked them about it, they said the shoes are horrible. They don't make their feet feel good. That's exactly, that was, that's why. And so they wore shoes that made their feet feel better, and
it is what it is.
Guns and buns. I mean, Carnell Tate made a comment that OSU
was looking for a bag of money
with Nike had to say,
because he was looking to get paid.
Yeah. And, to that, I mean, just look at the whole scandal from a couple of years ago, in college basketball. That whole thing stemmed from Adidas and Nike and, paying players to go to certain schools. And so now that NIL is a thing, it wasn't back then, but now that NIL is a thing, of course the shoe companies are, they're going to pump even more money into it now. So to that extent, yes, but because they can hide that under the guise of NIL now. And we all know that's out there, and that's obviously a factor in recruiting. So it's not as much the shoes, it is the NIL, regardless of, of whatever, and, whatever team it is and what brand, but the fact that schools can hide that money behind the NIL, All
right. I want to bring this one up from Irish Chi-Town. Irish Chi-Town always brings up good points. So I want to bring this up. He says, Vince, UNC put out an article a few years back that having Jumpman help them with recruiting, and they probably meant the shoes. That's great, but they're not exactly a neutral party when it comes to putting out that article. Notre Dame put out an article that said, Under Armour helps us with recruits. That doesn't know. And
it's being a partner with Jumpman,
right?
Promoting the brand that you've got, on your athletes. You can say that, but what is it? It's basically it's just PR for the shoe company, for the apparel company.
UNC probably has better traction with recruits when they say that Michael Jordan went here, as opposed to his silhouette is on the gear.
Right.
I mean,
so let me put it this way. Is it a factor? Sure. Because everything is a factor.
It's very low.
Is it the factor? No.
It's very low.
Whatever factors, I think, start up here, and then shoes probably falls at the bottom of the list. I think it would probably end up being, somewhere around 8 to 10 for most players. If they made a list of whatever, their factors are in what school and what program that they're going to end up with. So is it a factor? Yes. I just don't think it is anywhere close to being the factor for anybody, unless the NIL comes into play, and then you're talking about money changing hands.
Right. Crystal says, he's quoting me, he was looking to get paid. 17-year-old players look at apparel. What 17-year-old do you know that has to go to New Balance to get clothes? A hell of a lot, actually. And I don't know when the last time you went and walked through a high school, but I would say a very large percentage of kids are walking around with New Balance shoes. So that's just a bad example, in my opinion. That New Balance is a shoe that these kids wear. And I'm not saying that New Balance needs to be sponsoring football teams anytime soon. But if you're going to bring up New Balance, that is a very popular brand with 17-year-olds right now. So just throw that out there.
Mr. 2.0 seconds your emotion.
There you go.
All right. So
anyway.
now we can get off the very divisive apparel. And, just to go back, supposed to happen sometime this month. We don't have any more information.
And you know what? I can't wait for them to announce it.
When I said what I said earlier.
I can't wait for them to announce it so we don't have to talk about it anymore, to be honest with you.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, again, I'd just like to see kind of what the finer print, the biggest thing for me, I think, is regardless of the brand, especially if it ends up being Under Armour, will there be any flexibility in what shoes the players
wear? Right.
Can they choose their own?
I mean, obviously, the women's basketball team wore their own, so there must be some flexibility in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which would be harder to stomach, Vince? Brian Kelly winning a national championship at LSU or Tommy Rees helping Alabama win a national championship?
Oh, that might be the easiest question you've ever asked me. It's the harder thing to stomach would be Brian Kelly winning a national championship. There's no doubt about it. If Alabama wins a national championship, it's because, Tommy Rees obviously played a big role in it, but he's part of the machine, man. He's a cog in the machine. And they won just because of who they are. This is absolutely, it would make me sick to my stomach to watch Brian Kelly hoist up the national championship trophy. I would be visibly ill.
I agree. And, Nick Saban has won national championships with multiple offensive coordinators. Like Tommy Rees would not be the guy, he would not be the reason Alabama ends up winning a national championship. If Brian Kelly goes down there to LSU and wins one, I think that's going to make a lot of Notre Dame fans sick. But, again, it's like, hate Brian Kelly if you want. And none of us are by any stretch of the imagination, the biggest Brian Kelly fans right now, especially with the way that he left. But, I said when he took the job, if freaking Les Miles and Ed Orgeron can go to LSU and win national championships, Brian Kelly had to be sitting there going, come on, are you kidding me? And so, he made his little deal with the devil and he headed down south. But that would be my answer as well, for sure.
It would be horrible. It would be horrible. I would have that image just burned into my brain and it would haunt my nightmares. It would be horrible.
All right. So the Kansas City Chiefs are the favorites in Vegas to repeat as Super Bowl champions, and Georgia is the favorite to win another college football national championship as of right now. Would you bet on either of those two to win it all this season, or would you take the field against them?
I would take the field in both cases. I would feel better about taking the field in the NFL than in college football, to be honest with you, even though there's more teams and the field, makes my odds better on the college football side, but I would take the field in both. I think there's too much parity. Well, there's too much parity in the NFL. There's just enough parity where I wouldn't take Georgia in college football. Just enough. Because there's still tiers, and all of that in college football. Not anybody can win the national championship.
I got to go field as well. It has been almost 20 years since an NFL team repeated as Super Bowl champion. And that was New England in 04 and 05. That's how long it's been. And, Kansas City they're obviously the closest thing to a sure bet that you can get when you look at the fact that they've won a couple of Super Bowls, in the last four seasons now, and they've been to another one as well. They're the closest thing to New England that we've had basically since Tom Brady left the Patriots. So I would still bet against them because there's still just as good of odds, I think. On average, there's one team that goes from worst to first in its division in the NFL. Look at the Bengals a couple of years ago and what they did. They came out of nowhere. Now, they obviously didn't win a Super Bowl, but they got to the Super Bowl. Georgia's a little bit different because they, yeah. And, when you look, like Nick Saban, that he's got the quarterback, really both of those teams have. There are a lot of quarterback questions when you sit back and look at it across the SEC this year. Like, so it's going to be really interesting to see where they end up. And obviously, we know that Alabama has a quarterback, question, with Tyler Buckner and Tommy Rees, combine the two down there. So I would take the field against both of them though, as well.
Yep.
Especially, when you've got Alabama lurking and everything else.
You got Notre Dame lurking. Okay.
There you go. On the come.
That's right.
So David Ross, I meant to ask you this yesterday, and I forgot.
Saw this.
He got ejected in the first inning of the Cubs game against the Yankees Sunday. It was their last game, of course, before the All-Star break. And here's what I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Here's what he said. Here's what he said to home plate umpire Alex McKay, and they caught it on microphones. You've got to be better. You got one bleeping game before the break, and you're that effing bad already. So rate that rant, Vince, on a scale of 1 to 10.
I'd give it like a 7.5, 8. I would have liked it to be longer. I want more. I always want more. Like, he walked out. He's chirping from the dugout. He gets ejected. Once he gets ejected, he walks out and he gets in the face of the umpire. He says like those 2 sentences, and then he walks back. Like, I guess there's the whole, like, the George Costanza, like, leave him wanting more kind of a thing, like a mic drop moment, because the announcers loved it. They're like, that's the best thing I've ever heard. Yeah, right. They were all over it.
Paul was going crazy on the Yes Network.
Oh, it was hilarious. But I want more. Like, he was on a roll. Keep it coming, man. Keep it coming. So, and it was the first inning. It was the first batter of the first inning, I think. Like, it was early.
Like it hadn't even started. And that's what I didn't understand was Kyle Hendricks was warming up, and the umpire, like, I guess Hendricks threw like one too many warm-up pitches or something like that. So the umpire assessed him a pitch clock violation.
Oh, really?
The count was 1-0 to the batter, and that's got Ross worked up. And Ross got thrown, like I think you said, before he even got to home plate, so like right. He gets to home plate. And I thought that, like, for someone, especially who had gotten tossed already, this was pretty mild. So like, I'd still give it an 8, but I did think it was pretty golden, like you got one game before the break. You can't be this bad already,
Exactly. That was great.
Be good right now. And then you've got a 3-day break. Why are you this bad before the game has even started? That was pretty good.
It was a great comment. It was a great comment. I mean, he left us wanting more. There's no doubt about that. So David Ross, you get the bell.
First bell.
David Ross gets the bell.
I love it.
David Ross gets the bell. And they won the series. They ended up winning 7-4. They win the series. And you got a little bit of good momentum going into the All-Star break if you're a Cubs fan. So,
yes,
love it.
All right. One more question for tonight. This is a question from a listener that we got, I think, in a mailbag maybe last week that we hadn't been able to get to yet. What coach is or was the best to listen to in a post-game press conference?
I had to really think about this one. And I had to go back in my head and remember sitting in the post-game press conferences and listening to the opposing coaches. And for those of you that don't know, this is how things went. So they had one post-game press conference room. They would bring in the opposing head coach first. Then they would bring in the Notre Dame head coach. And then they would bring in Notre Dame players. And if you wanted to talk to an opposing player, they were just kind of out in the tunnel area. So we all got to hear the opposing head coach, which I kind of liked, to be honest with you. I enjoyed that opportunity. They don't do that anymore. You have to pick which coach.
Separate rooms.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to pick which coach you want to hear talk.
Does the visiting coach even get a room, or do they just do like
That's a good question. I'm not even sure, because the new interview room, quote unquote new, is over on the visitors' side where the visitors used to be interviewed. So I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I'm sure he's got someplace where he can be interviewed. But I remember enjoying listening to Pete Carroll.
I would agree with that.
And Jim Harbaugh. I enjoyed listening to those. And I'm talking about when Jim Harbaugh was at Stanford. And obviously Pete Carroll was at USC. I enjoyed listening to those guys because you never really knew what they were going to say. And I know this isn't the question, but the one that I hated the most, Lloyd Carr.
I did not enjoy Lloyd Carr just because, like, as much as you hate Michigan, I just loathe Lloyd Carr back then. And
me too.
He tried to, sort of like, he tried to play that game when the cameras were on him, but there's like the time where he's walking off the field that like he was just, treated a sideline reporter like total crap. I remember I can't remember which one it was. I don't want to say. I know it was a female. I don't want to say the name. It was just like got what I thought was a legitimate question and just did kind of the stare down and shook his head kind of thing. And it's like, like coach better if you don't want to
right.
be asked a question. So I couldn't stand Lloyd Carr. John L. Smith, do you remember him, the Michigan State coach?
Oh, good call.
He was a goofball, man. And
yes, he was.
That was back in the Brady Quinn days. And I remember, like he was asked a question about Brady Quinn and he called him Quinn the Eskimo. And he would just always like have just some weird kind of quippy stuff, to say that,
you never knew what was going to
sense
come out of his mouth. Yeah, that's a good one. I forgot about him. That's a really good one.
Yeah. This is a interesting question. Is Coach Kelly a robot? He's not a robot because like, especially, after, as we've all seen before, after a loss, he got a little bit better because I think he got talked to,
reprimanded.
Yes, for throwing players under the bus and so some of the other
notorious for that.
He is much better on Monday after he's had a couple days, to think about some things that he's going to say. The emotion usually gets to Brian Kelly in the immediate aftermath of a game. Just like, again, like think about he was asked after the Alabama game about closing the gap and that kind of thing. And, it was everybody else's fault but his.
He's so good at
that they lost and there was no gap to close and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I would not call him a robot by any means. He lashed out quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Chris. That was after the Hurricane game.
Yeah.
I remember
Sam Mustafer for the snapping. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep. Never got to cover. Andy Cheat Sheet said Mike Leach famous for his interviews. We never got to cover Mike Leach, unfortunately.
So it's got to be somebody that came through Notre Dame Stadium, essentially, because didn't go on the road very often. And so
I agree with what you're saying, though. I like sometimes it really like you sat there and you waited, like the opposing coaches sometimes could take a while, and maybe that's ultimately why they ended up splitting them up. But I do miss, getting to hear some of those guys talk a little bit. Like men's basketball, they typically, they do that format still over at Notre Dame after the games. Where like they bring in the visiting coach first, and then they used to bring in Mike Bray, obviously, when he was here. But yeah, so you'd get to hear from like Coach K or Roy Williams or Jim Boeheim and those kind of guys. And it was never mind. I can't. Buzz Williams.
From Marquette.
Marquette and then Virginia Tech, and he's at Texas A&M now. When he was at Virginia Tech, I think it was one of the last times he came here, if not the last time, he told a story about how when he was still in college, he was trying to, he wanted to become a coach. And he said he wrote letters to every coach in America, asking, like for advice and, like, what do I, all this different stuff. He said Mike Bray was one of, if not the only guy who wrote back, he was one of like two or three maybe who wrote back. And so he said he always remembered him for that. And like, that's a story that, we don't get if the setup's not like that.
Right.
So
exactly.
Get a little bit different perspective. Here's some of that different kind of stuff. I thought that was kind of cool. So I would include Buzz Williams, even though he's not a football coach. I would include him on that list as well. Yeah. Bo Schembechler, none of us were around.
He's going to say, not that old.
I might look that old, but I'm not that old. So Vince was Vince was still trying to figure out if he was going to the middle school dance back in the Bo Schembechler days.
When was he coach, man? Like that was.
I'm trying to remember, like, because he might have even been Gary Moeller was definitely by the mid 90s. I can't remember. Let me see if I can find here real quick when Bo Schembechler.
I'm looking it up.
Retired.
Come on. Here we go. He was at Michigan from 69 to 89.
There you go. Yeah. We definitely weren't around back then.
No.
I was Tim Priester about that.
I was 8 when he last coached a game at Michigan.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, Chris is 50. He's not much. He's just a little bit younger than me and just a little bit older than you. So right in the middle of us. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. We appreciate you joining us today. We've got more shows, of course, coming up over the course of this week as we get a little bit closer to the start of training camp, which I'm not allowed to say when it starts, but hit the like button on your way out. And of course, subscribe, rate, and review. And we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.